Time for us to start. Yeah, I think we're ready. Um, Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our study this morning, our Sunday Bible study. We're going to be opening the study of the Book of Chronicles. It's going to take a lot of mental elbow grease to dig through a lot of these things to start with, but we're up to the task. I'm confident if I can stay ahead of y'all, because I already know that some of you are ahead of me on this. So let's go ahead and open our study with a prayer, if we will. Heavenly Father, we are so thankful for your wisdom and for your love and for the plan that you gave, the plan of creation and the plan of salvation. We're so thankful for the Bible and the divine guidance that you gave us in understanding our relationship with you. We're thankful for the opportunity that we have to study, to roll up our sleeves and study your word, and to learn to apply it not only to the rest of the Bible, but to apply it to our lives and to the world in general, which is so desperate for your guidance and for your direction. If they would just go to your word, they would have what they need. We ask, Heavenly Father, that you look upon this study with uh, uh, with uh, uh, with favor, that it be scriptural, that you find it scripturally sound and pleasing in your sight. We ask that you continue to guide us and protect us in all those things. We're so thankful for those who have joined us here today for our Bible study, and we look forward to having those who are on their way for our service as well. We have many who are joining us online, and we're so thankful that they are able to do that, and we're so thankful that we have been able to develop the means of sharing this with those out there in the world, and we need to continue to do that, not just electronically, but through our word of mouth and through the example that we set for others as well. There are those of us who of our congregation who are not here due to illness or infirmity. We ask that you be with them, that you be with Fran as she continues to recover, that you be with Miss Betty as she continues to recover. And there are those who are here with injuries and illnesses as well, and we ask that you continue to heal them, that you be with Keith and Camille as they deal with their issues, and that Camille recovers from her fall, that Ann Grove recovers from her fall as well, and that you be with Phil as he continues to improve, to work to get his knee back to where it needs to be. Jim and Sandra have so many family and friends and loved ones who are struggling, and we ask that you be with them as they continue to provide that support. We ask that you be with Karen. We're so very grateful that the heart issue that took her to the hospital this week was not more and was not worse than it turned out to be, and we're so thankful that the doctors appear to have that under control, and we ask for continued healing and continued therapy. And we thank you so much for the skills that you place in the hands of those doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals. But we also thank you so much for the healing wonders of this body with which you have blessed us. And we ask that you continue to provide your providential care in those ways that we do not understand, but that we so much long for. We thank you so much for the protections that you offer our country. We thank you so much for the patience that you offer our country and other nations who might stray away from you and would risk falling, not only a falling away from you, but also a falling down in the world around us. And we ask for the strength and the guidance to once more establish ourselves as not just as a leader, a political power, a military power, Father, but primarily as a spiritual guide to that world around us. And we know that without that, we will not survive. And we ask that you continue to guide us and bless us and protect us in all the things that we do. We offer this prayer in your Son's name. Amen. Now, as I have said this prayer, and as I have concluded this prayer, as I'm saying it, I'm going through in my mind those things which Ezra has done with the Book of Chronicles. And so I'm going to go ahead and cover a few things with you. By way of that, we're going to do an introduction, and I note that we must end this lesson for church business purposes promptly at 10:30. Okay, so bear with me. I'm gonna try to rush through this, or else we'll be opening up the introduction a second time next Sunday morning, which most of you probably will not want. But there's so much information here that has been taken up, and I credit for the background on this. I credit Burton Kaufman. And I also credit Adam Clark. Now, Burton Kaufman, we lost Burton Kaufman in what, the 60s? Kaufman. It might have been the 80s, but we lost Adam. But Adam Clark was in the 1800s, and so there's not a tremendous amount of information or material or commentary or study, that public study that's been done on the Book of Chronicles outside, of course, of the Jewish faith. And since I don't speak Hebrew, that makes it kind of difficult for me to keep up with what those guys are trying to talk about. But in any event, we'll talk about the Chronicles, and I've titled it "Concerning the Kings of Judah." There are a number of titles which have been used. The days they call him, the Catholics call him Saint Jerome, but the Jerome was the one. Remember, Jerome was the one who translated the Latin Vulgate Bible. Okay, and so we see that Jerome, a title, goes back to that they looked at the number of titles, and of course the LXX, the Septuagint, was the Greek, and Jerome translated from the Greek, although not always correctly, translated from the Greek into Latin. But the Greek translation was actually produced in Alexandria, Egypt, under Alexander the Great, who commissioned the translation of the Old Testament from Aramaic and Hebraic into Greek. And that was very important, because that Greek Bible then they were able to make that translation from the Greek Bible into the New Testament, which was written basically in Greek. Okay, and so and in fact, the New Testament, most of the New Testament was written in Greek, and only later, as an afterthought, translated into Hebrew, and also translated into uh, uh, the languages of the Turkish language, if you will, what became the Turkish language. But things, the title, there are a number of titles that were written. In Hebrew, they called it the words of the days, and also the journals. In the Syriac, that was the other language. In the Syriac version, it's called the Book of the Transaction in the Days of the Kings of Judah. And that's important. That's critical, and there's a reason for that, and I'll get back to it. Okay, and then in the Arabic version, they called it the Book of the Annals. Okay, and this in the Septuagint, it's called the Remembrance of Things that were left or omitted. In other words, it implies that this is designed to be a supplement to the books, to Samuel and Kings. Okay. And so as we look at that, we Chronicles is probably as appropriate as any other name that we can use. There's a tremendous amount of history, but it's inspired. It's an inspired historical account, and we'll discuss that again later on. Okay, and so let me see if I can get this to move forward. I've turned it off somehow. There you go. Okay. And so it was originally a single volume. Remember, we talked about that when we talked about how we got the Bible and how they had to translate it, how they had to record it, how they recorded it on scrolls of vellum. And so it was recorded on a scroll. And remember that scrolls can get very bulky because they're animal skin. And the maximum length of a scroll, strangely enough, could be somewhere in the range of 30 feet. Okay. Otherwise, it got too big to carry. So, which wasn't really a problem in the original version of either Samuel, Kings, or Chronicles, because remember, in the Hebrew language, they didn't have vowels. So it was much more compressed. But when they translated it into Greek, they had to split it up because of the length involved, the size of the scrolls involved to get it on. So they found a convenient place to break them when they did, and as a result, that's why we have First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, and First and Second Chronicles, which are divisions that were not originally intended. Okay. All right. So I think I probably have discussed that there adequately, and the authorship, it is ascribed to, and there's very little dispute to the fact that Ezra, remember Ezra, right? The book of Ezra. Okay, remember that Ezra, as a scribe of the, whose one of his jobs was a scribe, an official scribe of the document of the Persians. Okay, and so Ezra, according to ancient Jewish tradition and according to the Jewish Talmud, is the author and the scribe. Of course, we know that he was probably assisted in his gathering because it is a compilation, much like Luke's work. Much like the gospel account, according to Luke, was a compilation because he relied on his contact with others. And Ezra's primary contributors of information were probably Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Okay, those who were in the closing days of the captivity and the return, of course, were charged with the return and the spiritual upkeeping of the remnant that returned to Judea. Okay, and so it was written probably somewhere between 450 BC and 420 BC during the days of Persian Empire control of Judea, because it was not written in Greek. It was not. It was. It is loaded with Aramaic words, ancient pre-Hebraic, if you will, Aramaic words throughout, and there's almost then that was the official language of the kingdom of Persia, and also the kingdom of Babylon, incidentally. Okay, and so there was almost a total absence of any Greek words, and so they're pretty sure that this work predated the overthrow of Persia by Greece, because one of the things that Alexander did is to immediately institute Greek language as a common language and mandated that Greek be taught in all the public schools throughout the realm, that Greek be taught to all the scholars, and that was going to be the official language of the kingdom, but also of any work that was of any import in terms of writing and philosophy. So according to Nehemiah, who was a contemporary of Ezra, Darius II began to reign around 423 BC, and the last works of the Old Testament were completed around 420 in BC, when Malachi finished. Okay, and then we see that 400 or so years of silence between that and the gospel accounts. All right. So then archaeology has supported that this has been historical. There were a lot of critical scholars who tried to say that these forms and these ceremonies that were described did not exist in Mosaic times. And yet, they go back into the archaeology in that area, which was Canaan, and we find that these ceremonies and forms actually existed based on what they've been able to dig up concerning Canaanite rituals used during that time of Exodus before Moses brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, and so that many historical statements that are found in the Chronicles have in fact been established by archaeological evidences as well. And there's really no reason to doubt the historicity of the Chronicles. We note that historical content therefore should be assumed to be careful and truthfully prepared and can be accepted and believed. And if you and there's a lot of evidence, attestation, if you will, to how carefully and how truthfully Ezra worked and how he did his homework, and he didn't shoot from the hip. He didn't make it up as he went along. Sources that are cited from the Old Testament are numerous. There are over 20 sources which can be cited there, and that supports the amount of documentation, the extensive documentation that he relied upon, and the meticulous accuracy that he worked on. And there are texts where he supposedly made additions or abridgments to events found in Scripture, which have been found to exist, the basis for that have been found to exist in the caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in Qumran, the caves of Qumran, where these things were put to protect them from the the invading Greeks and the invading Romans, and were put there before, in many cases, even Babylon, the captivity of Babylon. So it predated the Babylonian captivity, these fragments, and predated the Masoretes, who actually developed the technique for copying and preserving those texts. And so we find fragments in the caves that support the work, that the changes or the additions or the additions to the concepts that Ezra laid out. All right, so his purpose, and there were a number of purposes here. The first purpose was to use the history of the kings of Israel to draw that inescapable conclusion that we've always talked about, blessings and cursings, that faithful adherence to the covenant with the Lord brought happiness and blessings, and forsaking that covenant ensured disaster and ruin and cursing, as God would say. Okay, the results of those blessings for righteousness, cursings for rebellion. All right. And so another purpose is to demonstrate that the true Israel was restricted to those who remained in the covenant relationship with God. And by that, he means the original, he means Judea, basically, is what he means. He does not mean the northern kingdom. And those who continue to accept and continue to accept the Davidic dynasty, to respect the chain of kingship from David on down. And they had to be dedicated enough to following those precepts that they joined that contingent that returned from Babylonian captivity. Okay? And he looked at northern kingdom as apostate from the very start, and you'll see the statement to that effect in 2 Chronicles 10. And that's why you don't see a great deal of information relevant or relating to the northern kingdom, because he only addressed the northern kingdom in such capacity as it actually impacted the effect of the exiles and the returnees. Okay. And so another purpose is to make sure that Israel regain that proper respect and that observance of the law of Moses. Well, that's what all of the prophets were involved in. But remember that Ezra was one of those who, when he came back and he instituted and the law and instituted, once more made all of the priesthood in particular. Remember, the priesthood was marrying into the Samaritan population, and that was something that was affecting their purity. And so he provides proof of the prior existence and validity of holy law to the exiles and returnees. Remember that there were two generations. There was a younger generation that were not being properly taught as they were returning. So he wanted to once more reestablish that spirit of delight in the worship of the Lord that David had proclaimed. Okay, and confirm in the hearts of Israel their fidelity to God and to His law, to build that fidelity to God in His people, and that was one of the purposes of this work, and to turn the hearts of Israel away from popular misconceptions such as the worldly political importance of the kingdom. Remember that even when Christ came, when Christ returned, that was one of the things that they thought the Messiah was going to do, was reestablish Israel as the political top of the heap in the world, so to speak. Okay, and so that was pride speaking. That wasn't submission to God's will, and he wanted to make sure that the important thing in their lives was worshiping and pleasing God, and not the world around them, and not to be seen, not to look to be seen around the world as much as to be seen by God. Okay, and so he wanted to explain also, and you'll see a number of these instances. I'm only throwing two of them up in here to explain certain canonical writings which have been misunderstood or misinterpreted. So if somebody get 1 Samuel, somebody open up their Bible to 1 Samuel 22. Verse 19, 1 Samuel 22, verse 19. And someone who has a King James Version, open up 1 Chronicles 20, verse 5 for me. Who's got 1 Samuel? 1 Samuel 22:19.
And now the city of the priests smote me with the edge of the sword, both men and women, children and suckling, oxen, asses, and sheep, with the edge of the sword.
Okay. Let me, yeah. Someone else, now who's got 1 Chronicles 20, verse 5? Okay, go ahead.
Then there was war again with the Philistines, and Elhanan, the son of Jairus, slew
Lohami.
Okay, the brother of Goliath, the Gittite, whose spear shaft was like a weaver's beam.
Okay, so now, this passage, and again, if I break up my Bible, 1 Samuel 22:19 might not have been the right. I might have miscopied that. It's actually the passage. This is actually the passage that talks about David. Wait a minute. Okay. I don't find that here, but that passage, the passage is being referred to as a passage that says that someone else killed Goliath or Goliath. All right, and in First Chronicles, what has happened here is that Ezra goes back and says that and points out that it was not the man mentioned in First Samuel that killed Goliath in that particular passage. Okay, it creates confusion. The reason it creates confusion is because Goliath or Goliath was a family name, all right, like a last name. And so there were several Goliaths. And the one that was killed, that was outlined in 1 Chronicles 25 was the one who killed one of Goliath's brothers. And so there was some misperception historically as to, well, did David really kill Goliath or not? David did kill Goliath. But this other mighty man of valor, and there were several who were listed who actually killed other brothers of Goliath, and their name also was, incidentally, Goliath. Okay, all right. So Goliath is not the first name; it's the last name, the family name. And the other example, 2 Samuel 24, verse 1. Someone find that for me, please, and someone else find 1 Chronicles 21:1, and see if we can avoid falling into that trap again. So that says that the Lord moved David, okay, to take a census of the people which God had previously forbidden. Okay, well, that goes along the same vein as saying that God hardened the heart of Pharaoh. Okay, God directly hardened the heart of Pharaoh. Well, God did harden the heart of Pharaoh. God hardened the heart of Pharaoh by having Moses preach to him. Okay, and that's what preaching does. It'll either harden your heart or it'll soften it. Okay, and the same thing with David. David was convinced that he needed to count his soldiers so that he would know what he had. All right, and so the implication here is that God intentionally tempted, but that's not how that works. Remember that God permitted Satan to do his work, and that is exactly what Ezra addresses in 1 Chronicle 21:1.
And Satan stood up against Israel and provoked David to number Israel.
Okay, so now he says Satan did it. And yes, that is exactly what Satan does. But God did not prevent Satan from doing that. Okay? In other words, Yeah,
22:19.
thank you.
I think that's what you're looking for.
22:19, let's find that. Just Second Samuel. Go ahead and read it for us, Judy.
And there was again a battle in God, listening. Gideon, the son of Abedinah, slew the brother of Goliath, Hittite, that whose spear was like a reed king.
Okay.
And there was yet a battle in camp, a man of great stature had on every hand six fingers and every foot, 6 toes, full and clean in the timber. And he also was born in the time. And he defied Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shimei, the brother of David, slew him.
There you go. Okay, so you see that there are a number of there's a little bit of confusion that Ezra seeks to clear up as he does this, and there'll be other instances where that happens as well. But we want to talk about, and we want to stress that one of the arguments that had been made in other books was that it looked like they were cobbled together. But what we're looking at here, it makes it difficult, especially for those who want to attack Chronicles, when it is so uniform. So when it is so uniform in style, it is so uniform in syntax, and in the prose, the language that's being used, that it becomes pretty clear that there was only one man involved in putting it together, even though he relied on others to provide him with information and guidance as he went along, in all probability. And so scholars certainly see every reason, and especially the Jewish scholars, to believe that it has been passed down accurately and unaltered in its form and in its content. And we note that the characteristics, there are several, but the emphasis throughout is religious and theological, not political. It's not about military power. It's not about political dominance. It's about obedience to God. Because according to Ezra, they have one God, and that is one king, and that is God. That was always supposed to be the case. And we'll see that he'll address that issue later on in First Chronicles. But he also totally rejected the northern kingdom as in any way pertinent to the future of God's people. You know, that's how the Bible is written. There are people who are addressed, and then when they cease to be of any, at that point, of any relevance to God's plan, they kind of drop out, and you don't see them anymore. I mean, a good example is what happened to Joseph. Where do you hear about Joseph after that? After Matthew, after the birth of Christ, where do you hear of Joseph? Because he's dropped into the background. The emphasis has been shifted, and so once they are no longer contributing to the fullness of time, as I like to call it, they slide into the background where they're hardly ever seen again. And so he looked at the rebellion that followed the death of Solomon as a rebellion of God ordained against the God ordained Davidic dynasty. That the Davidic dynasty was God's plan, and in truth, the fact, God continues to address that issue as well. And that seed line of Christ had to be preserved, and that was the purpose of that. So, and they remember that there was so much effort that was taken to prevent them from returning back to Jerusalem to worship, because they were afraid they would go back to Jerusalem and they'd stay there. So they forsook that one place of legitimate worship of Israel, and that was the temple of Jerusalem. And so thereby they rejected the Samaritan community, and they rejected their worship forms. So even though they thought they were worshiping God, were worshiping cows, essentially, at that point. Okay. And so there's a tremendous emphasis on genealogies all the way from Genesis up to the grandsons of Zerubbabel. Remember, Zerubbabel was the leader of that first contingent that went back to rebuild the temple. Okay, and constantly ascribes all those events in Jewish history to the hand of God. Okay, even every calamity, every deliverance, he portrays as a consequence of evil or good deeds of kings and or nations. So he relates those actions, and he gives you that chain reaction that goes on as a result of the mistakes of the kings or the good things the king did. And so he constantly appeals to people to renounce that longing for political dominance, that longing for the old politically dominant and decadent and sinful nation that existed before God took them down a peg and took them and sent them into exile. Okay, and to concentrate on the fidelity of God and of His law. And so there's a this is a very basic general outline of the Book of Chronicles, and we will we'll go into this step by step as we get into Chronicles. I will note that we're going to probably gloss over most of the first 9 chapters, because they are all genealogies. They're very tedious. There are a few historical events and comments that we want to address as we go through, and I may jump to them. And you'll see if you read through those that there are certain names that will jump out at you. Okay? And one of the things that I want to note is that as you look at these genealogies and you look at the way that they've gone down the line, you'll see that something starts to happen at Nimrud. Okay, at the son at Nimrod, when it gets to the name Nimrod, you'll see that after that, one of his descendants is references made to the world being divided. Okay, remember that Nimrud, according to our Akkadian history, was the man who has instituted the building of the great tower to reach to heaven, which caused God confused their language and divided the world. And as you watch the descendants, for the reading that descendants, you'll see names that we've discussed in the Bible. Names of cities, names of regions, geographical. And you can almost trace the movement of mankind out of the Mesopotamian valley and into the rest of the world by tracing these names as they go through, especially the descendants of Shem and the descendants of Ham. Okay, and there are these. If there are no questions, I'm not going to deal with the outline of First and Second Chronicles until we get to next week. Are there any questions at this time? We need to take a break. We need to take care of some church business. We'll be back at the top of the hour. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, either save them for next week or send them into Myron online, and you can ask those questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. Thank you for your attention. Men's meeting in the conference room.